All right, well, welcome to episode number 26 of the Oklahoma Weather Show. It is July 9th, 2014. We've had a pretty wet start to the day here in Oklahoma. No one ever complains about rainfall, especially here in the summertime when it can usually be just downright hot. But today, we're talking a little outside of Oklahoma weather. We're talking about the tropics, which here in Oklahoma, a lot of times we can be impacted by tropical weather. Meteorologist Danielle Dozier in charge of today's guest. So, Danielle, take it away.
Well, thanks, Damon. And today's guest is going to be Dr. Chris Hennon. He's joining us from Asheville, North Carolina, and I had the privilege of studying under Dr. Hennon. I'll go ahead and call you Chris, don't worry. Chris, back at UNCA when I was attending there. I graduated in 2007, so I took some courses, and tell you what, kinematics and dynamics. Man, I'm glad that that's over. But yeah, so a lot of us at KOCO were from UNCA, so I thought, let me dig into UNCA past and see if we can bring someone on. So we're excited to have you, Dr. Hennon, and for those of you who are watching out there, he is an associate professor there right now and has spent a lot of time in Miami, worked at the National Hurricane Center, and has been doing some extensive research on tropical cyclones over the past several years. And so, Dr. Hennon, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away and talk about some of this amazing research you guys have been up to.
Well, thank you, Danielle. It's really nice to talk to all you guys, and it's really good to see that our graduates have been so successful out there in Oklahoma. It's kind of a little bit weird to have four of you from our department all at the same station out there, but in any case, I'm really happy to be here. And just to lead off, Danielle asked me to kind of talk a little bit about some of the research I do out here at UNCA. And it turns out that the research I'm doing is really something that just ordinary people, not even meteorologists, can take part of. So I thought I would share that with you guys first, and then let you guys kind of ask me questions about that, or about the hurricane season, or anything else you and your viewers may be interested in. Let me see if I can figure out this screenshot thing here. I'm going to show you a website that kind of shows you what I've been doing. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So the project's called Cyclone Center, and it's a website that anybody can go to, and it's very simple to find, just cycloncenter.org. And the whole notion behind this thing is that, as most of your viewers probably know, hurricanes spend most of their lives over the ocean, and we don't really have direct measurements of some of the properties of hurricanes, like what their wind speeds are. And people are interested in that kind of thing for both societal and for scientific reasons. So we developed this website so that people can come to it. They can actually click on a storm. So for example, right now we're featuring these 4 storms down here, and these all happen to be storms in the Western Pacific. And you can choose one you like. I don't know. This one looks like it has a nice, pretty picture. And when you click on it, essentially what we do is we ask you some very simple questions about the storms. We designed the site so that my grandmother could do it, so that was kind of what we were thinking. And the first thing it asks you is to pick what kind of type it is, and obviously this doesn't look like a traditional hurricane. These are storms that take a while to become really strong, and this one's from an early part of its life cycle. So you're given some suggestions here about what the type might look like. You're given instructions over here on the right on the types of patterns that it may be. And so basically you'll click on one, and then it shows you some pictures, and you're just kind of matching which one this most looks like. So you might say it's this one, and then it asks you to find where the center is, and, well, I don't know. If you don't know, we tell you kind of what to look for over here on the right. And when you click on that, then it asks you something about the colors. You're looking for what color do you see the most, essentially. And then you're looking for this one, this little band here, how far does it wrap around? And essentially all of your answers go into a database, and we tell you right off the bat how strong we think the storm is based on your responses. But we're going to take all of your responses and all of your peers who also have responded to this image and put that all together and come up with an actual wind speed based on some science. And so the main goal of this is to essentially go back in time 30 years and look at all the tropical cyclones that formed in the last 30 years and to come up with a unified data set of how strong the storms are. And if we do that, we're going to resolve a lot of disagreements some people have about the strength, and it's also something that can be used for climate applications. How have these storms been changing over the last 30 years? This is all on social media too. If you find an image you like, you can share it on Facebook. You can we have a place where you can discuss the image with other people. So there's a bunch of discussion boards. You can see that people have posted storms that they've come across that they think are really cool. Let's see if I can find a good one. So this was from Hurricane Ivan, which some of you may remember from 2004. You can see this guy's actually from Germany, posted a little note about this, and then I responded to that. So it's a really interesting site. It's something that we're trying to get people from around the world to do. And anybody can participate as long as they have internet connection. So that's kind of a quick demonstration of what I've been up to. I'm actually not teaching this semester. I'm actually going to be working on this full time. So it's something I'm interested in hearing from your viewers about, if they check it out, what they think about it, maybe ways we could improve it. So I hope you guys will check it out and help us out.
Dr. Hennon, even though we're a landlocked state out here in Oklahoma, I mean, we still have a lot of interest in tropical activity. It tends to actually be our drought busters, and in parts of the state, especially over the last couple of years, we've been saying, the only thing that's really going to help us get out of drought is to get something tropical. So, yeah, I mean, even though we are landlocked, there's still a lot of interest, even out here in the plains, on what the tropics are doing. So this is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Even here in Asheville, we're kind of away from the coast, but if we get a fast-moving hurricane coming up the Gulf of Mexico or off the Atlantic, back in 2004, some of you guys might remember when you were here, we had those two storms, Ivan and Francis, that came through within a couple of weeks of each other, and it really caused a lot of flooding and issues and other issues for Asheville. So. That's a very good point to make, that even people in Oklahoma and the interior parts of the country, you get a storm moving out of the ocean that can bring its moisture with it and actually be a drought buster, like you said.
This is a very water-sensitive part of the United States out here. People certainly pay very much attention to even we got about I live in Moore. We got about half an inch to 1 inch of rain this morning, and let me tell you, I mean, that will. People will be talking about that for a while. So, but this is phenomenal, and it's funny you talk about Ivan and Francis, because Danielle and I were talking about it a couple weeks ago, and we certainly remember very well those two storms. I lived in East Asheville, right by the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I remember one storm dropped so much rain that we lost our water, and then the next week or 2 weeks later we didn't have any power. We were trying to figure out what's worse, not having water or not having power. I mean, both of them are pretty bad. But I certainly remember those storms very well.
Yeah, Chris, we were talking about that, like Damon said, and just Francis is the one I remember just because of the river right there. I lived off of Leicester Highway, or Leicester Highway, whichever you want to call it, as some locals would pronounce it. But yeah, I remember going without water for like days, and that's just really hard to do, having to heat up bottled water in the microwave and then try to take a shower. So
it's tough. It's tough. That's for sure. Brad was down at Biltmore, I think.
Yeah, I was working at a furniture store in the Biltmore Village area, and if I remember correctly, it was Francis that was the flooding, and it knocked out the main culvert of the drainage basin near Mount Mitchell, I believe, the Swannanoa River, which did a lot of the flooding. Swannanoa to the French Broad River, that I always thought that was a crazy name for a river, the French Broad. And then I guess it was Ivan that had all of the wind, and I thought that was really interesting, Dr. Hennon. I remember Hugo as well. back in what, 80, 89? Is that right,
I
Hugo?
believe so, yes.
Okay. Hugo moved inland so quickly, and I was living in the Appalachians in Southwest Virginia. I mean, we were having 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts in '89, and it was kind of. I remember Ivan being very similar, where it moved inland so quickly that I think you had hurricane-force wind gusts into parts of northern Georgia as it came into western North Carolina. Yeah, that was the power outage maker. It was just out of power for so long. It was literally scary. I thought, oh heck, I'll go storm chasing here in this tropical system in Asheville, and that was not a safe place to storm chase. There are way too many trees.
Right. I mean, Francis that year you said it was the flooding storm, and part of the problem was when you put those two together, you had all that rain from Francis that really softened up the ground, and then Ivan came with its winds. 10, 12 days later, and all that soft soil just let a lot of the trees go. So a lot of trees came down, fell on some power lines, I think it fell on one of the water conduits that Asheville had from its reservoir. So I wasn't here at the time. I was actually at the Hurricane Center, and I wasn't right in the middle of what was happening, but I heard stories from people who were here about how on campus here everybody had bottled water. There was no restrooms to use. You had porta potties all over the place, and it's just amazing that a couple of tropical systems like that could have such a huge impact on a place like Asheville.
Oh, and you have all these kids in the meteorology class there and the meteorology program, and we're wanting to talk about it, and you're thinking, who can I talk about with this storm? Who can I talk to about it? It was actually a lot of fun. I mean, it was definitely memorable. Definitely memorable.
And Dr. Hennon, you came on in 2005, right?
Yes, fall 2005.
So I remember that was a pretty active year. I think we went through the whole alphabet, right?
Oh, it was amazing. When I was at the Hurricane Center, I was there at a very active time. I started there in 2003, right when we had Hurricane Isabel, which your viewers may remember was one of the strongest storms we've ever had in the Atlantic. And then the 2004 season for Florida especially, they had, I believe, 5 landfalls that year. Fortunately for us in Miami, we missed on all of them, at least directly, although I had some plywood up in my windows for a couple of weeks at a time. And then I left right before Miami got whacked by Hurricane Wilma that year. So I was lucky to really avoid the direct hits, but these things tend to follow me around, it seems, sometimes.
That's funny. I remember Isabel. I was living actually in Southeast Virginia. I was back home before I went to UNCA when that one hit, and when it struck, I remember the eye passing right over us, and it was extremely calm. It was just a really surreal experience. Pretty cool.
Dr. Hennon, did you look much at Arthur this past last week? It seems, tracking Arthur, I remember I was watching the storm track right over the Outer Banks, and I thought, my gosh, this is really going to cripple the Outer Banks with storm surge flooding, going to wash out the roads, and then everything settles down, and it seems like you have one buckled road and some leaves stuck to windows. What are you hearing about Arthur? I mean, was it over forecast? I know earlier you were talking about disagreements in strength of tropical storms. If you could address that a little bit, and whether you have any thoughts about what happened to Arthur.
Sure. I followed Arthur. I was actually at the coast of South Carolina the week before when Arthur was starting to get itself together down there in the Caribbean. And overall, I think they did a pretty good job. They forecast the development of Arthur very well. And then the forecast for the track, I think, was done really well. I think they're a little bit too far to the right, but they thought initially it was just going to clip the coast, not really make landfall. But ultimately, I think it was well below the typical air ranges that they've had for forecast tracks. You mentioned the intensity, and as far as the damage goes, can you see my screen right now?
Yep.
So here's a picture of Arthur. One of the things that you have to always think about with these storms that are kind of glancing the East Coast is the strongest winds of these northward moving storms are always going to be on the right-hand side because you're adding the storm motion with the wind of the hurricane. And so even though the storm made landfall, the winds on the left side are going to be somewhat weaker than the actual velocity that they tell you the storm is. So I think that was a pretty big factor in limiting the wind damage, at least, that the storm motion actually canceled out the winds of the actual hurricane a bit. And as far as the intensity forecast goes, I think they were pretty close. I think initially if you look at the numbers, they probably under forecast the intensity a little bit. I think they thought it would be a Category 1 hurricane. But as the storm went on, I think they weren't that far off. I think they slightly underestimated that it would. They didn't really think it was going to be a Category 2, at least early on. But the conditions were really good, and I think that overall, I think they did a pretty good job. If I had to summarize.
And maybe this is me, looking through this scope of where you hear Cat 2 hurricane, you think, oh, damage, but maybe the lack of damage is a great indicator of how conditions have changed as far as building codes go, or flood structures, or FEMA flood walls. Maybe we need to somebody give credit to that too. It'd be interesting to see how much of that played a role with how little damage there was.
That could be. I know that some people in the tropical cyclone community are advocating for a move towards warning about the impacts of the tropical cyclones rather than just the winds. Mm-hmm. Because some of these storms, they may have strong winds, but they may be very small, or maybe the winds are weaker, but they're very large, and so maybe the impacts will be over a wider area. You also have to factor in, of course, the storm surge. How bad is the storm surge going to be? And that depends on a whole bunch of factors like the coastline shape, the actual bathymetry of the ocean, the fetch of the winds. And so there's been some move towards moving away from this traditional scale, which we've used, called the Saffir-Simpson scale, which just essentially assigns a number based on the wind speed, the maximum wind speed, and moving towards a more more of a general warning system that takes into account all of the impacts that a storm may have rather than just the wind.
That's one thing, Dr. Hennon, that we have experienced a lot, even in the media as well, as focusing more on impact-based forecasting. We look at that 1-inch snowstorm that happened down in Atlanta back in January, and going back and looking at a lot of what was being said by the media is that they were giving you a number. They were saying you will have 1 inch of snow, but they weren't telling you what was going to happen with that 1 inch of snow. So even across the media, we've been looking at more impact-based forecasting as well.
Yeah, and that 1 inch of snow is going to mean different things in different areas. Mm-hmm. 1 inch of snow here in the mountains basically shuts everything down. 1 inch of snow in Cleveland, Ohio, people just brush that off as a little flurry. So that's a good point. If you're in Oklahoma and you hear a warning for, I don't know if you guys get a lot of snow and ice there in the wintertime, but it may be completely different than like here in Asheville.
Oh yeah, one storm that is amazing to me, and I'm going to put up a screen share of this, and maybe you can maybe we can import this into your website. There was Tropical Storm Erin back in 2007, because this very well may be the only storm that seemed to still have an eye structure even this far inland. Is this unusual to see? 800 miles away, and you have a tropical storm, or at this point it was a depression, and it still has what looks like an eye?
Yeah. That's I've forgotten about this one. When was this?
This is back in 2007?
2007. Mm-hmm. I remember reading about this and seeing these pictures, but I haven't looked at it in a number of years. But yeah, if you were just looking at this, you could take away Oklahoma City and put the Atlantic Ocean under that, and I would be like, wow, that's a nice looking tropical cyclone.
Yeah, no, well, and it was a very interesting day. Now, I wasn't here in Oklahoma City yet. I was actually down the road in Abilene, but you see a storm coming in, and from the stories that I heard is that a lot of people weren't expecting much from this storm as it came this far inland. So most TV stations turned off, their 10 o'clock news at night, said chance for some rain tonight. As the remnants of this storm come in here, not much of a threat. And then all of a sudden, Saturday morning comes around. People are waking up, and we've got tornado warnings out there, and you have 6 to 8 inches of rain falling, which out here will lead to a huge amount of flooding. And so this storm right here, I mean, I hate to say this because it's one of my biggest pet peeves, but this is the one that kind of caught some people off guard up here in Oklahoma.
Did you guys get some wind from this as well?
Yeah, Jonathan, you're shaking your head. Yes, you were here.
Yeah, I worked that night. I remember it really well. And to give you a backdrop, I mean, it wasn't forecasted. HPC had no QPF in their forecast. SPC had no outlook for thunderstorms. And it was a Saturday morning that this all kind of started. I worked the morning show, and went four-wheeling in southern Oklahoma that afternoon, came back, got back, and the evening guy didn't think anything of it. He left, and I'm like, okay, if storms start to develop, I'll come in and I'll cover it early because I'm working the Sunday morning shift. And I laid down for a half hour. I wasn't even asleep. I got a call. There's thunderstorm warnings in western Oklahoma. I'm like, what? Okay, and so I roll in, and I went from basically like what's going on here to wall-to-wall coverage throughout the entire night with multiple tornado warnings. Peak wind gust was 82 miles an hour in Watonga, and yeah, it was an eye-opener. I had tunnel vision. It was like, what is going on? And you're just doing wall-to-wall coverage. You're like, all these new tornado warnings. What's going on? Are there tornadoes? And it was not forecasted, period. It was caught everyone by surprise, and it was kind of the perfect storm. Remnant tropical storm coming through, and the humidity that night. The dew point was in the mid to upper 70s.
Oh.
It was very tropical. It was very warm, and this thing just evolved, and it had an eye wall. It had a not eye wall per se, but you can tell there was an area of low reflectivity that would be the center of the tropical storm. And I just remember, and then once the sunlight came up, they're doing water rescues. There's water rushing over I-40 west of El Reno, and they're rescuing people who drove through the water. And we're capturing all this live on TV. Helicopter, there's some guy's a farmer, tried to drive down a road, and here we're doing live coverage, and the helicopter is rescuing this guy out of his truck and dragging him through the water to land. Unreal. It was a nightmare. I hope I never have to deal with anything like that ever again. Give me a couple tornadoes, yeah, no big deal. But a tropical storm in the overnight, yeah, look at that rain. Unreal.
Yeah,
Unreal.
I mean, that's a lot of rain out here, and so that storm right there, and I'd like to, I'd like to, maybe one day, find someone to just figure out how could a storm do this, because it's always those, you always have your textbooks. Dr. Hennon at UNCA, a lot of times when we were there, we would, look out the books, and we'd learn about the textbook ways of storm development and storm motion. But nothing seems to go, by a textbook out here in Oklahoma. If Mother Nature can produce it, I think it can happen here in Oklahoma. We seem to get all sorts of just weird things. And that's probably why we have so many UNCA grads playing out here right now.
Well, if this were a textbook storm, you would have got about 1/10 of an inch or 1/4 inch of rain showers and nothing else. So I wish I could explain what happened to you guys with this one, but I'm at a loss. Usually when you get tropical cyclones that move over land like that, of course, they're going to weaken, but you might get maybe some interaction with some mid-latitude type forcing that might cause it to be able to maintain itself for a while. But that picture you show me looks like a tropical cyclone. So I don't know what to tell you about that one.
Yeah.
I did some research, a little bit of research on it, and And by that I mean just looking around online and NOAA and stuff, just briefly because I was doing a report on this storm, I think last year. But anyway, apparently, and Jonathan, you might be able to chime in, I think the Weather Service was saying there were like 6 tornadoes from it in the Norman County warning area, and like you guys said, almost a foot of rain in certain spots. I think Kingfisher County like really got some heavy rain from that storm, and I think they were trying to debate on the classification of it, was because they were saying, from what I read, that it wasn't quite a hurricane, and even though it had that eye structure, it wasn't a hurricane. They couldn't really call it extratropical cyclone for other reasons, I guess. And you know, they were bouncing between that and subtropical and all kinds of things. So I think they just called it like a remnant low, I think is what they ended up calling it, or something. So.
That might be the most. That might be probably the most beautiful-looking remnant low I think I've ever seen.
I know. I thought it was interesting when I was reading about it. I was like, well, they didn't really know what to call it, I guess, because they'd never seen anything like that, like it strengthening over land.
I mean, just you guys know how strong the tornadoes were?
What day was this? You know, I could probably pull up the SPC database.
I'm there right now. They don't have any official local storm reports for tornadoes in Oklahoma. Not saying it didn't happen. We'd have to look at the official.
Yeah, they did. They had about 6 from what I read on. Just give me a second because I'm going to look it up as well. You guys.
It very well may be one of those. You know, it quickly produced a funnel. You had a tornado that may have, you know.
Okay, I found it.
Okay.
It was August 18th and August 19th was the event, and it says that there were, hold on, wait for it. Between the 18th and the 19th, there were
6.
6. Yeah, 6. So 6 tornadoes. There were 2 EF0s, 2 EF0s, or I guess F0 at the time, 4 F1s. And yeah, and that's it. So
yeah, I mean, and that's what it did. I mean, that's what we had out here. You see all that flooding going on.
I see the National Hurricane Center. Interestingly enough, they have it classified as a remnant low with 20-knot winds on the 18th, and all of a sudden on the 19th, they have it as a 50-knot low, and it actually dropped 9 millibars in 6 hours.
yeah.
So, Dr. Hennon, let me ask you this then. So, after you have an event like this, what are the closed door meetings like at the National Hurricane Center when you have a storm that comes up here? You know, it does something that no one expected. But what do they kind of have a meeting and say, all right, who dropped the ball on this one?
That actually does not happen until after the season is over. Sometimes you might have 2 or 3 storms going on at the same time, and there really is no time to do a post-mortem on a storm during the season. So the procedure is, after the season's over, they'll assign, each hurricane forecaster will get assigned, depending on how busy the season was, 2 or 3 or 4 storms for them to make a report. And so they will do all the background research. They'll revisit all the forecasts. They'll revisit all the warnings and the watches that went out. They'll do some research on all of the impacts that the storm had, how many people died, how many people evacuated, and so on. And then they'll produce a storm report like I have up on my screen, where they'll write up the history of the storm, and they'll go through the statistics, the casualty and damages, and then they'll critique their forecasts. So all of that happens after the season's over. You can see here for Erin, they actually acknowledged the Oklahoma Mesonet data. So they did spend a good deal of time, probably the most in history, analyzing Erin as she moved over Oklahoma.
It's a so the pressure went down to 995 and went to 50 knot wind. So I mean, could there have been a chance that they could have possibly given that a name, or at least bumped it back up, or is it one of those once it gets downgraded from a storm to a depression, can they not bring it back up to a storm once it's over land? Or I mean, how does that work? We don't study a whole lot of hurricane activity out here. You know, you give us severe weather and tornadoes, and we can give you all sorts of stuff. But I don't know much about the classification system and the process that goes for hurricanes.
Well, in general, tropical cyclones, once they make landfall, they cannot, and once they say it's either extratropical or a low, they cannot all of a sudden rename it. There's theoretical reasons for this. There's just scientific reasons that 99.99% of tropical cyclones, once they run over land, then that's the end of them. Their energy source is cut off. They're never going to be a tropical cyclone again unless they move back over water. And this happened with Ivan actually in 2004, where Ivan made landfall. The Ivan we were talking about at the beginning of the show. Ivan actually made a huge loop-de-loop and went up over Canada, and then moved back over the Atlantic and kind of looped down back and over the Atlantic Ocean and started to reacquire some of its tropical characteristics. And so in that case, they actually gave Ivan its name back. And so that was a case where Ivan died and then came back to life. So it can happen, but the storm has to be over ocean and has to be what they would say as a tropical-looking storm before they will give the storm its name back.
Dr. Hennon, did you study Sandy?
Sandy might be the most studied storm in recent years. I haven't actually done any research on it, but Sandy was an interesting case because nobody really knew what she was when she actually came ashore. In the end, it really didn't matter if she was a hurricane or some hybrid type of storm, but a lot of the research that people have been doing about Sandy is what was Sandy. Sandy kind of was in the process of transitioning into some mega mid-latitude storm when she was coming ashore. So Sandy was interesting for that reason, and of course Sandy was also interesting because Sandy hit a highly populated place in New England. So it's something that I wish I had some time to look at, but I haven't actually personally looked at her.
Yeah.
The whole concept of what happened with Sandy is that it's, in the weather world, in the meteorological community, we focus so much on the little particulars, but you go outside of that community and you just go into, everyone else out there, and they don't really care about, whether, it was a hurricane or a mid-latitude cyclone. All they want to know is what is this storm going to do and how is it going to impact me. It's a lot like out here during the severe weather season when we have tornadoes that hit these communities, and one community may have been hit by an EF5 and another may have been hit by an EF4, and you have some people out there saying, well, this storm was worse. Well, you know what? It's a game with no winners. It doesn't really matter, I think, to everyone else out there. If a tornado hits you, it's going to be the worst tornado ever. And if you're impacted by a storm, whether it's a hurricane or a mid-latitude cyclone or an extratropical storm, it's going to be the worst storm that you ever experience in your life because it impacts you.
Yeah, and I really value what you guys do because you're the interface between the public and people like me. I have all the fun. I can sit here and I could be like, wow, that's pretty intriguing. Maybe I'll do some research on Sandy and I can just pursue stuff that kind of interests me, and it's not really critical that I communicate in real time with people what's going on. My old job is a little bit different at the Hurricane Center. You have forecasters that really need to be able to communicate clearly with people what they think is going to happen, how this is going to impact you. And it's really a place of, actually there's a whole new area of research in improving the way that we communicate with the public as scientists. And even communicating with you guys, how can the scientists communicate with you so that you can understand, so that you can then pass that information along to the people who will need it?
Yeah, Dr. Hennon, I got a question for you. The shortest response you can give, what do you feel is a correlation between climate change and hurricane activity? Is there a correlation? Is there not a correlation? Is there a hurricane cycle that's independent of increased surface temperatures. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, do you guys have about 3 hours?
Yeah.
As succinctly as I can be, yes, climate does affect hurricanes. At the most basic level, as the climate warms, it's going to warm the oceans, and that's has already been happening. So as the oceans warm, that provides more energy for the atmosphere. And at a most fundamental level, more energy means stronger storms, more rain, etc. So there's no doubt that climate affects hurricanes. Now, the thing that you brought up with, is there other cycles which affect hurricanes? And of course, there is. There's cycles in the ocean that affect hurricane frequency and hurricane intensity. There's year-to-year changes in the atmosphere. I know the 2014 Atlantic season is forecast to be a relatively quiet one, mostly because we have an El Nino that's developing, which tends to suppress hurricane activity. The ocean temperatures are relatively cool this year. So the year-to-year, you're not really going to notice big changes. But scientists believe that over the long haul, over 10, 20, 30, 50 years, we're going to notice that hurricanes are going to be becoming more intense in general. As far as more frequent, that's not necessarily the case. It really depends on where you are in the world. In fact, in the Atlantic Ocean, scientists believe that hurricanes may actually become less frequent, but stronger when they do form. So it's it's not something I can really adequately address in the brief time we have. But for your viewers out there, I just hope that they realize that there is a direct correlation between climate and hurricanes, and that as climate continues to get warmer, you're going to see changes.
Dr. Hennon, that was a very broadcaster type of question, because that's what they have us do here. The anchors will pitch to us and say, Brad, that storm, is it climate change? And then the producer says 15 seconds. So that's how our minds are working around here.
Well,
I was going to say real quick on that note that you were making on maybe less frequent but stronger cyclones. I think that it's important that also the viewers out there realize that it only takes one, and we actually know that across Oklahoma. And as Damon was saying, if it impacts you, then obviously you're well aware of it, and it might impact somebody in Oklahoma City, but not in Woodward, which is about an hour and a half or so away. So I think it's important that that it only takes one storm to really mess up somebody's life. And so we had Arthur that's already formed, even though it's supposed to be a less active season or near normal season. So yeah.
Right.
Well, when a Category 2 storm. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Hennon.
I was going to say, when I do interviews with the media and they ask me, what's the seasonal forecast look like for the Atlantic this year? And seasonal forecasts are great. You could say, well, it's going to be an active year, an inactive year. But I always give the example, in 1992, it was a really, really inactive year in the Atlantic Ocean. But in 1992, we had Hurricane Andrew, which is one of the most devastating hurricanes to ever hit the United States. So, like Danielle said, it only takes one. And just to go back quickly to the climate point, one analogy I hear a lot recently is that, as climate's changing, basically all we're doing is we're changing the probabilities. So we're changing the probabilities of having record high temperatures, for example. We're changing the probabilities of heavy rain events. So we're loading the dice, essentially, is what's happening. We're more and more likely to see warmer nights, warmer days. We're more and more likely to see stronger hurricanes. And that's kind of I think that's a good way to talk to the public about it, is that you're not going to see it in one single event, but you're going to see the probabilities of the extreme events go up.
That's a great way of putting it. Dr. Hennon, we're kind of getting close to the end of our time here. Is there anything that you want to plug?
Well, I'll just put up my Cyclone Center site again, because this is something that is really important for. Let me get it back up here.
Now, are your kids going on this all the time in class?
Yeah, we actually I taught tropical meteorology last fall, and we took one entire class period. I just had everybody doing this at once, and we had something like 4,000 classifications in 1 hour. But we need about 2 million of these classifications in order to bring a successful conclusion to the project. So again, this is something that's fun to do. You can be a part of the crowd. You can see what other people have been doing. We want 10 people to look at each of these images, and you're going to take your answers, and we're going to combine them with other people's answers. And if you like tropical cyclones, or you have a passing interest in meteorology, I think this is something that you will have fun doing and interacting with other weather geeks out there. And you're also advancing science. This is something that's helping.
What about an iPad app where in-app purchase to upgrade to the next level? You can make it an arcade game, right?
I would love to do that. I've been addicted to Heyday, which is an app where you farm. It's very addicting, and I wish we had something like that to make this more addicting, but unfortunately it takes a lot of manpower to create this website, and we don't actually have the resources right now to make it more addicting, but I think you'll find it addicting enough.
Now, is this something they have to create an account with? Like I see it says log in or sign in.
Yeah, they don't have to. I have one, but you can do it anonymously.
Okay.
And we still use your data, but if you create an account, it's very easy. You just need an email address. And we track your classifications. It's not like we don't use your information for anything, but it helps us to get better results because we actually assess how well you're doing. If you're some crazy Yahoo who gets on here and tries to screw things up, your data will not be used. So it's all in there. You shouldn't have to worry about screwing up. We take care of all that. And even if you know nothing about hurricanes, your responses are helpful to us. So it's just something I encourage you to check out.
That's great. I mean, it looks really cool. We didn't have this much online interaction back when I was at UNCA, and I was there from 01 to 05. So you guys are definitely doing some pretty cool things out there.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you very much for coming on the show. Anyone else want to add anything real quick?
I just want to say thanks for coming on. It was good to talk to you again, and yeah, keep doing what you're doing. It's really cool, and we'll encourage people to go to your site and help out.
Well, I had a great time, and again, I appreciate what you guys do out there, and I'm proud, even though I didn't have a direct impact on you guys' careers, except Danielle. I guess Danielle was in my classes, but the other guys there, even though I didn't directly, I wasn't here when you were here. It makes me happy to see you guys successful, and keep up the good work out there.
Thank you very much, and keep producing great meteorologists out there at UNCA.
We'll try.
All right, you have a good one.